Okay, everyone. So, welcome to this episode of Reiki Radio. Today, we are here with Rochelle Jamila, and I am excited to have this conversation with you because of how your work highlights, the connection between earth and body, and how this ties into our healing, especially with a lot of focus on women. So, I want to first welcome you to the show, love.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and to chat about all the healing earth Reiki things.
Yes. So that's one of the things before we get into the nature of your work and how this earth body connection is really highlighted. Of course, I have to ask, how did you get started in this realm of working with Reiki and also becoming a doula?
I would say my path began when I graduated college, and I kind of just realized I was super burnout and depressed, to be quite honest, and alienated from my body in some ways. And so I was like, okay, there's a lot of healing work that needs to happen here. And I just began working with herbs and began kind of paying more attention to my cycle, my fertility, and then also got into chakra balancing, which was my first foray into energy medicine. And then from there, kind of just the rest was history. I learned about Reiki, and I did a Reiki attunement, and found a teacher and began my doula trainings.
Okay, so just even with what you said, I guess we will just go right into it because I think it's such an important thing. A lot of us are disconnected from our bodies for so many reasons, right? And for a lot of women, it's because of different traumas. And I know that that also ties in with your doula work as well. But was there something specific, like in your own life, that triggered this for you or brought this awareness to you?
I would say I have always been a young feminist, even in high school. That was, I think, right as feminism was right before it was beginning to be trendy.
Right.
My senior year of high school, my friends and I were like, hey, I went to a boarding school. So there was a weird hookup culture that was happening in the boarding school, where it was trying to copy colleges, but we were all still babies.
Right.
So it was just really unhealthy. And my friends and I were like, we read bell hooks, let's talk about feminism. And we were the pariahs of senior year. I hated us and you loved us. And there was so much tension from that. And so from there I went to college and I was studying dance and also decided to study women and gender studies. And so I feel for me, I don't know if there was ever a specific point of being wow, I'm a feminist, or I really want to advocate for women. But I had a strong mother, and I saw the women around me in my community always working so hard and kind of still being cast in these gender roles.
Right.
And I was like, no, it doesn't make sense. We're so powerful and we are so magical. We just deserve to really be fully in our power.
I love hearing you say this, and it's interesting because a lot of people that I know in my life, we talk about the generation below us, and I know you're younger than me, of course, and it's fascinating to us how much more tuned in you all seem to be, and how you all have a lot of focus on this whole realm and spectrum of healing and identity and what it means to be a woman and empowering yourselves in ways that we weren't necessarily as focused on at your age. So it's really phenomenal to see, and I'm curious to see how this all evolves, what you all will do and the children you all raise and all of these things. But anyway, so really, it's really true. But you mentioned that you studied dance, and I know that this also ties into this connection to earth and the body. So I want to ask you about that too, because a lot of times people think of healing as just, very specific things like Reiki or acupuncture and this. How has dance and movement played a part in you feeling connected to your body, or even, connecting to your healing process?
Wow. Well, just hearing that question like brings tears to my eyes, because I think about how transformative dance has been in my life. I have danced since I was a 3-year-old, and I like started in ballet lessons then. I've danced through college, and now I'm a professional dancer. And so it's really hard for me to even imagine my life without this healing modality, which is like kind of how I see dance now. Definitely was not how I was brought up to see it, like in ballet class, being all perfect. But now as a contemporary dancer, where I am working in New York and have practices with people who are focused on healing and justice and just like transforming our experiences, I see movement as like one of the original medicines.
Mm.
There was the medicine that our ancestors were doing, and they had other kinds of medicine, but a drum and your feet. If you can walk, you can dance. So for me, I see dance as like really liberating. And I think actually, I look at some people in our society who don't have like a dance practice as part of their culture. And you can see like how that manifests in people's bodies of like being kind of like robotic and not being able to fall into the flows and the rhythms of the earth. So that's like, I mean, I could talk about like dance forever and for hours, but I would say that's like my like little window into how I think dance is a healing modality in itself.
I love that you said fall into the rhythms of the earth. And even you saying that, I think of, yes, I think it's a big part of our culture. I mean, I actually just had a conversation with someone about this a couple of months ago. And I was talking about how, like we grow up dancing. I mean, like music is everything, part of like every family function. And, that's like just a form of expression. But when you say that, like catching the rhythm of earth, I have to ask, for people who may hear that and be intrigued by that, do you have a suggestion of how we could maybe do something really simply to feel that or experience that type of connection?
Yeah, I mean, I would say following music that has drums. Like drums are really important in capturing that rhythm. And we see that in African diasporic forms of dance and music. So tuning into some like Afro-Caribbean music, I really love. Going and taking a West African dance class. It can be awkward if you've never done West African dance, but wow, it is deeply healing. And that's actually like one of the first books I read on energy healing. That was like one of the suggestions for how to get in touch with your root chakra, is to go take like an African drumming class and like dance with African drums. So that's just one way, I would say.
Well, that brings up two things too. Again, like I used to practice belly dancing, and in a lot of classes they would have live drummers come, and one of my belly dancing teachers, she also infused like Afro-Caribbean dance in that as well. And there's something so like hypnotic about the drums and the beat of the drum and like what it does inside the body. But it also reminds me of shamanism and how like a lot of people use drumming as a form of moving ourselves into trance or like a static dance and putting ourselves into another state of consciousness. So I have to ask you about that too. Like when you are dancing, do you feel like you go into another state of awareness? Like what is that like?
That's such a fun question. I would say for me, dancing, it does feel transcendent. It does feel like, and it's specific dancing. I mean, I perform on stages, and so that's different than I think having my own personal practice and like twerking in my bedroom, like there's such a wide spectrum there of like the kinds of movement I'm doing. But just last weekend, I performed in a work that was by this Black femme choreographer. And it was the most free I've ever been in a performance, in a professional like practice of dancing. And I think so much of it was because we were just like, it was a group, 10 of us, like Black femmes, like singing at the top of our lungs, like R&B songs, and like just getting into our groove. And that was so freeing. And I think it speaks to what you were talking about before of like growing up, just like going to cookouts and going to dances and like being around your family and dancing and singing and kind of just like being playful with it.
Right.
And the potential within that play to really open ourselves up to being like our child selves and like just unleashing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually pretty powerful that you read that as a suggestion in a book of energy healing. Because, I mean, obviously, I think if we think about it, what it feels like to dance and how I love watching people when they completely lose themselves, you know, and you can tell like it's like the music has just entirely taken over them and there's no shame, there's no thought, there's no nothing. They're just like free. And that's like the word, right? Like you just feel free and alive. So it's really, really powerful. And I hope people will give themselves an opportunity to play just thinking about that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to make sure to ask you about too, I mean, because that I know is a huge component in your work, but I know that you're also a full spectrum doula. And so this is like another aspect of how, you know, the body is connected to earth. And when we spoke before, you shared how you got into this and why it was so important to you to support women around their menstrual health and through their birthing cycles. So could you just share with everyone like how that came to be for you and why it matters?
Yeah. I would say that for me, that kind of began, I had very tricky situation with an IUD. And it was kind of just like, I like got to college. My mom was like, you need an IUD. Like, that's what you need. Like, and so I had all these like, just kind of unideal situations, like beginning with the birth control pill, like as a teenager, and then getting an IUD and put in when I was in college and it being like incredibly painful and kind of traumatizing, to be quite honest. And I know it's not like that for everyone, but that was my personal experience.
Right.
And then getting it removed was even more of an ordeal. And just the whole time I was like, wow, I could have really used some support through this. And then I began teaching myself about my cycle and following my cycle. And I was like, wow, like we just really aren't taught so many of these things. Like our bodies are so complex and so beautiful. And I just feel like I grew up thinking, how can I suppress this? How can I hide this? How can I be as much like, you know, a man and like pretend like I don't bleed every month as possible?
Yep.
And so that's like my personal like entryway into being more aware of my cycle. I will also say that in studying women and gender studies in college, I began to learn about the Black maternal mortality crisis.
Yeah.
And I was just floored. And there's no excuse for the fact that just like the rates at which Black birthing people and their infants are more at risk in our healthcare system. And so for me, I realized like I love Black women. I love Black femmes. I love the fact that we have this power in our bodies. And I also want to advocate and support us, like first and foremost, and all people who bleed, because we all deserve to feel empowered. And so then I became a doula.
No, it's really powerful. And I'm glad you point that out because I think a lot of people are unaware of that, the mortality rate and with relation to birthing in Black women. And I also wanted to ask you about if you could explain for people what a full spectrum doula is and what different ways you support women from like menstrual health all the way through to postpartum.
Yes, for sure. So a full spectrum doula is someone who supports people who have a cycle, who are menstruating at any point in their reproductive lives. So at any transition, that could include when someone first gets their period and is going through puberty, to someone needing to have an abortion or going through a miscarriage, to birth, to postpartum. And I would even say, as a doula, I'm super excited to support people going through menopause as well, to honor all of the transitions that happen in our cycles throughout our lives, and to give those the care and support they deserve.
I really love that. I mean, it's amazing to me because you speak of all this so freely and beautifully. And I have to tell you, like in the years of me growing up, and I'm sure a lot of women listening to the show will be able to relate to this. These topics were really like taboo at a time. Like no one really spoke about these things. I mean, even, the basics that we got in like sex health education in school, or like even what our parents may have told us, it wasn't in depth. And it really does highlight like what you're saying, the importance of, I mean, just for an example, one of my clients, because I am 42 now, and one of my clients, she's 50 or 52, somewhere in there. And she, a few months ago, sent me an article about perimenopause. And she was like, I'm sending you this because no one told me about this when I was in my 40s. And she's like, I want to make sure you know. And I was just like, wow, it's interesting how so many people go through their whole lives and only learn about their bodies as they're going through these things and didn't have that support. So it's phenomenal that you are doing this type of work,
Yeah.
I have to ask you too, is there this component of in what you do you find that there is an aspect that things come up for people that highlight other things that need healing in order to connect with and I guess kind of honor whatever they may be going through in any phase of the work that you provide?
Yeah, I would say I think with a lot of women, and a lot of my focus right now is, I mean, I am supporting like birth clients, but a lot of my focus is on people who are just like dealing with period problems,
Right.
which I think, to be quite honest, deserves more of our attention as a society, because yes, when people give birth, it's huge and it's so important, but we kind of only give those people our attention because they're creating another person, whereas they live with their cycles for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And people have like problems and like PMS or like luteal symptoms that they get every single month. And so a lot of my work lately has been focusing on like learning more about these problems and how to support people through these various like period symptoms or endometriosis, PCOS, different symptoms related to cycles. And so much of our physical manifestations and physical symptoms are connected to imbalances in terms of like suppressing the feminine, like fighting our cycles and not wanting to really like release into, like having a time a month where maybe we slow down and we're present with our bodies and we give our bodies what they need. And I also think looking at the postpartum, just like time, it's a window for how we can learn how to treat ourselves during our periods as well. Like,
Yeah.
postpartum is the time to slow down, to honor the self, to let the self heal as you're deeply nourishing your body and the human you created. And like our periods are like little tiny windows into how can we deeply nourish ourselves and like deeply rest in those moments so that we can rejuvenate for the rest of the month. And that can affect how we're living our lives and how our bodies feel for the rest of our cycle that month.
That I'm smiling because, okay, two things. One, when I was younger, I had terrible, terrible cramps, and I literally like every month hated being a woman, and it took, like later in my life, and especially once I got into energy work, learning to honor that process and like this cleansing cycle and this whole, just the cycle period, and like having a respect for, the process that our bodies go through, right? So, and just thinking about that, like I literally hated being a woman at least once a month. Like that's kind of intense, you know, and
Yeah.
yeah, but what you just said, I literally had a meditation during my last cycle where I was exhausted that day. And I was in my meditation, and the message that came through was exactly that. Like, this is a time for you to like slow down, like rejuvenate, like you're going through like this cycle of cleansing and purification, and you need to stop, like really honor like what is going on and pay attention to what is going on. And I was like, wow, yeah, wait. Yeah, because I think a lot of times we even need to hear exactly what you said. Like, we need permission sometimes to like, hey, you could take care of yourself. Hey, you can slow down. Hey, listen to your body. All of these different things. So in your work with that, I mean, is that like a big part of what you incorporate in helping people understand the cycle that they're going through and what may be needed and how to nurture themselves through all of it?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, particularly with my clients who are menstruating people,
Mm-hmm.
um, whether they're Reiki clients or whether they're doula clients, I do talk to them about their periods, and I do talk to them about symptoms that they might be having, like back pain. Okay, well, if you're coming to me in a Reiki session for back pain, let's also talk about how your cycles are. And let's like integrate these things, because it's a really huge part of being a woman or having a menstruating body. It's like there's no way to like separate it, like, oh, I have these migraines, like, and they just mysteriously pop up every month. Okay, yes. So meditation could support you, as well as let's talk about other things that could support your cycle and just like give you some relief.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is beautiful. Okay. So I have to, I mean, because you do, it's interesting how you have all of these different modalities, but again, how they really do highlight the importance of being connected to our bodies and like honoring the experience of being in body and like what's actually going on. So how does Reiki tie into all of this for you? Do you use Reiki as a totally separate thing, or does it come into play in these different sessions that you do throughout your doula work as well?
I think I offer Reiki sessions on their own, and also if people come see me for doula work, or even um, like I know a lot of dancers, so I'm often talking to dancers who don't really have a lot of resources
Mm-hmm.
for like healing modalities. So a lot of the educating I do is sometimes in a studio setting, and it's talking about maybe not even giving Reiki, but it's talking about the principles of Reiki, of like mindfulness and of like following your breath and meditating, and talking about the chakras. I focus a lot on the root chakra and the sacral chakra, because I feel like we're a society that's like really up here in the higher chakras.
Yes.
And as people who menstruate, we have a lot of energy happening in those bottom two chakras, and it's really important to tend to those.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of being rooted and grounded and connected to the earth. So I do try to bring attention, I think, to those two chakras in particular if I have Reiki clients who are bleeding people, and women. And in my doula sessions, of course, I'm like, I am a Reiki practitioner. And sometimes when you're supporting someone at a birth, they need Reiki, and the Reiki knows that. So it's not even necessarily like, okay, like let me turn on my Reiki hands now, but it's kind of just like that intuitive sense of I'm going to support this person, and the Reiki flows.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, there's two things I want to ask you, but this first, with the work that you do, and for anyone listening, if people are having a hard time with their cycles, or recognize that there is some kind of disconnect between them and their bodies, or like being upset or angry even at their bodies for the process that they're going through, can they come to you for sessions about that? Like, is it a blend of like education as well as like the energy work can come into play as well?
Yeah, totally. I think that's my ideal kind of session for, particularly for period problems.
Mm-hmm.
And as for my period doula work, I work with people in terms of tracking their cycles and learning how to track their cycles, talking about nutrition, talking about energy work, how I can support them with some Reiki, but also how they can, balance those chakras for themselves and give themselves relief.
Right.
And then any like plants and herbs that could support them in terms of that healing process. So it's really it's like an integrated practice. And I just like make a cup of tea and we sit and we talk. And so that's probably my favorite thing. I work out of my home, and I like always like to have like my little teacups and, like hot nettle tea.
Yeah.
So we're nourishing ourselves as we're talking about the healing and as we're moving into it.
I love that. Now, this is the other thing I had to ask you, because when we did speak before, you spoke about how you were able to liberate yourself through this understanding. So, and I thought that was so powerful too, just the idea of liberating ourselves through becoming more aware of like our body, our connection to earth energy and our body, and how our body is even another representation of earth itself. So could you just share like how this work has liberated you, and how you think people can liberate themselves through this type of understanding?
Yes, for sure. So I would say a lot of my work at its core is rooted in climate justice and social justice as a Black woman. And I think what this work has done for me also is connect me more deeply to the work, to the earth, and to my ancestors. And in that way, it has been deeply healing and brought me home. Because I think in our society, we're detached from the earth, and we forget that we are actually animals and we depend on this earth for everything.
Right.
It is an abundant home and it has provided so much for us. But we have a responsibility to our mother, if we're using that metaphor.
Right.
And I think that metaphor is really helpful, because the way we treat the earth as a larger society is very toxic and is very masculine. And she is fertile and she is nourishing and she gives and gives and gives. And so for me, a lot of this work has been like honoring the earth and honoring the earth as the feminine, and honoring myself also as the feminine, and realizing that these principles of yin, the feminine principles, versus yang, the masculine principles, like yin is slowing down, yin is honoring, yin is nurturing. And that is so much of a doula's work. And that is so much of the work we need to be doing to heal the earth and to heal our society. So for me, my work is like one huge metaphor, and it is seeing that when we liberate ourselves, when we heal ourselves, and we empower ourselves with the knowledge of how to do that, we also can heal the earth and heal as a collective.
Yeah. It's a couple things come to mind when you say that. One, it reminds me of, you did mention before, attuning our bodies with earth. And I think of how many ancient cultures really highlighted our connection to earth and like syncing our own rhythms to earth, and how important that was. And, even down to, eating what is in season, or honoring the shifts in seasons or lunar cycles and all of these things, to have more understanding of our own workings and how we function. But you also make me think of this idea of doula work, because I think a lot of times when people hear doula, they only associate it with birthing, right? But it sounds like a lot of what you do is, one, it seems like you're like this steward of earth, in the form of, like the physical earth, as well as earth being the body temple, and really highlighting how much support we may need and don't even recognize necessarily, because we haven't been trained to pay attention to earth itself, as well as earth as the body temple, right? So I want to ask you about that. Like, how do you see yourself as like a caretaker of both representations of earth energy?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I feel very called to the earth,
Mm-hmm.
and feel very called to nature. And I think that's part of also connecting to my ancestors and honoring that my ancestors and all of our ancestors were people of the earth.
Yes.
Even, you know, the dominant culture, when we look at Europeans, like their ancestors were also people of the earth. And there was like colonization that happened in Europe itself. So people trace back to those ancestors who were connected to the earth and did have practices that honored nature and that had traditions that were based out of nature and healing practices based out of nature. There's so much to learn there. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so much ancestral wisdom. And if we remember who our ancestors are, we remember who we are. And we remember that we are the earth's children. So I think that's really important to me, especially right now with like what's happening with climate change. It is incredibly scary. And I think to be a person of my generation, to think about having children, to even sometimes I've babysat like little kids and they'll come home so distressed about climate change.
Mm,
This is so, so important. How can we not be stewards of this earth? How can
right.
we not be stewards? And women are metaphors for the earth. Like we, in our culture, we are the oppressed. And as humans, we are oppressing the earth. So I think there's so many layers of connecting all of our oppressions and seeing that until we are all liberated, and I mean that as the earth, as Black people, as brown people, as transgender, disabled people, like immigrants, the list goes on, until we're all liberated, none of us are free.
Wow.
And that's how I see it.
Honey, I know, I love it. I'm like, man, I could just imagine people listen to it like, yes. Um, as something that you said, though, it really struck me because you've mentioned a few times the importance in your own work of connecting with our ancestors and our ancestral lineage. And it it all kind of ties into that rooting, right? Like going back to, even like we use the term of going back to our roots and going back within and going back like into that connection of what they understood, which is very it's extremely powerful. But what's interesting is I have noticed it seems more people are starting to recognize that and move towards that. So even for you in your own practice, when you connect with your ancestors, do you have a personal practice of like, altar work, or do you do things intentionally out in nature? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think there's so many ways that this can be
Mhm.
done. For me, I live in New York City, so it is hard to like be out in the trees and like one with the forest. Although that is totally what I wish for because I'm such a little nature bug. But in my apartment, I do have an altar for my ancestors, and I do have in like pictures of my ancestors. I have a plaque from my grandfather's. He was a judge, so I have a plaque from his desk, and
Mhm.
I have a pair of earrings that belong to my grandmother. Um, and just like it's a simple altar with like water and sometimes flowers and like seashells. And so
Mhm.
I think we all have this capacity to invite our ancestors in, and I am definitely no expert in it. My ancestor practice is super young, and I am on my own journey.
Mhm.
But I do know that that is something that is really powerful. And my practices, they come from learning from practitioners who and spiritual leaders who are of African descent. And so that's what I pull from in terms of my ancestor altar. So I encourage people who have different backgrounds to learn about the traditions for honoring your ancestors. And some things are simple. Definitely hang up pictures of your ancestors, and like you can call on them anytime. You can think to yourself, ancestors, like, support me. And
Yeah.
they're there.
Yeah.
But also, like, and this is with herbalism, this is with like healing modalities. I always, always encourage people to learn about the practices of your ancestors. Like, what better way to honor them than to like have a practice that is rooted in their traditions.
Right. It's interesting hearing you say that too. It makes me think about like bringing it back to where we started with dance, and how a lot of dance in different cultures are meant to intentionally like invoke the energies and inviting in the ancestors, and connecting more deeply to like the other realms, or guardians and spirits and these types of things. So it's an amazing thing, just thinking about like your body of work and how each aspect of it does highlight this earth body connection. Was that even intentional for you, or did it just happen to pan out that way?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's really great to hear, but it is also well integrated. I think it was like, it happened in many different like seeds.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a point where I was like, wow, I am becoming a doula, and wow, I am a dancer, and I have a Reiki practice. But wait, I don't want these things to all feel separate.
Right.
And I actually did go through a fellowship, like a community healing performance art fellowship with Ebony Noel Golden, who's I would call one of my mentors. And that was a really huge step for me in integrating all of these things with spirit and with ancestors and with my own African and Southern Black roots.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say that and speak to that it definitely was a conscious choice once I realized I was interested in all of these things, to begin to understand how to weave them together.
Yeah.
Because it can be like, I didn't want to feel like I was putting on just like a totally different hat every time I went somewhere else.
Right. That makes total sense. And it highlights a theme. Fortunately on the podcast, I get to speak to so many beautiful practitioners of various modalities. But one thing that has highlighted, and the same has been true for me, is that we all kind of craft our way, so no matter what you study, at some point it's like you have to make it your own, right? And you have to figure out what feels right and true to you in your personal practice. And so it sounds like you're doing that, and that's amazing. I have to ask you this though, with it, was that something that just came easily for you? Did you ever like question like, ooh, am I messing something up to integrate all of these things, or did it really just feel like they harmonized well together from the beginning?
I would definitely say I wanted things to integrate so much more easily than they did at the beginning, especially with dance, because I'm so formally trained. I think it was very difficult to begin to step out of that formal training and think about, how can herbs be utilized in this? Like because I have a herbal practice and it's a personal practice at the moment, with some knowledge around like doula work in particular, but I'm deeply passionate about working with plant accomplices and plant allies. And so I was like, how do I incorporate herbs into my dance? Like, I feel like we need nature, we need like the herbs. And most recently I choreographed a dance that was somewhat based on my relationship with cotton root bark. And that was, I think, for me, the first time I felt like I was fully beginning to like synthesize and integrate those two. And a lot of it comes from, instead of just like focusing so literally on this plant needs to be like in the dance, it's more like, okay, what does this plant mean? What did it mean to my ancestors? What does it mean to me right now? What does it symbolize? What context historically was it within?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I move from there? And so it became this beautiful dance, like with cotton, which I view as an accomplice. particularly to enslaved African women as a form of contraception. And so, yeah, I was like, I felt so like empowered by that. And I was like, all right, this is going to be an empowering dance. Here we go.
I love that. I love that. Well, you're saying that too. I mean, on a couple of different levels, it's interesting how powerful that must be to connect with that history, but to be able to express it in a form of like devotion. I mean, that has to be powerful. I can't even imagine, even not being the dancer, but visually being able to. Gosh, if I ever come to New York, I'm gonna have to come see you perform.
Yeah.
I will say too, for people listening, you do have beautiful imagery on your Instagram, which we'll share at the end. But gosh, what was I going to say to you? Now it totally left my brain. It was about the dance. I don't know. It just left me. Yeah. Like, gosh, brain fart. But yeah, I think that is so beautiful. And oh, I know what it was. It reminds me of you saying that too. It reminds me of in yoga. And a lot of people may not realize it, but when you take yoga teacher training, you find out that so many of the poses are mimicking, nature, like whether different animals or literally there's like a mountain pose or like a tree pose and all of these things. And again, these different physical embodiments and representations that we're doing that can also connect us with and remind us that we are a reflection of earth and we are of earth. I mean, it's amazing. It's really kind of peppered in so many things, even if we're not fully aware of it.
Yeah, definitely. I practice yoga, and hearing you say that, it didn't even register with me like, oh, when I'm doing this mountain pose, I can literally embody the energy of the mountain.
Right.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. And you really think about all of the poses are named after like animals or, something in nature. Yeah. And I think the one that really struck me is like, cat cow and like downward dog, like really thinking of like, oh, what would a cat feel like coming into this pose and these different things. Yeah, it seems like hearing you say what you're saying, and again, thinking of yoga because I'm not a dancer, but it's like it kind of activates something in our field. Like it's almost like activating our DNA, that remembrance that we're connected to all things. Like you're not separate from the mountain, the tree, the ancestors. All of that is alive within you, and giving yourself this opportunity to express that has to be healing.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think I've begun to see dance differently, I think, doing the rest of my work, and kind of just realizing I don't want to be doing dancing for the sake of dancing, or like abstract dancing, which I think is kind of a privileged perspective of art, is to make art that is like supposed to be abstract and not influenced by like all of our histories. And I just see dance as fundamentally so powerful for our collective healing that it deserves to be infused and like understood with all of these stories and all these complexities.
No, totally. And I want to share how people can connect with you, but there's one last thing I have to ask you about. When we spoke, you said we have innate power and magic, even if we don't realize it. And I was like, yes, honey. Yes, we do.
Wow, I said that.
So what does that mean? Yes. We have innate power and magic, even if we don't realize it. Yes. So
that's a word. That's a word I gave, I guess. I love it.
It's beautiful and it's impactful. And I hope that through this conversation, so much of what you shared will inspire people to start to tune into their body and be more mindful of earth and start to see those synchronicities between them and, the Great Mother. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. And
Yeah.
I know it will happen. It will. We will all like rise to our abundance and honor that we have this inside of us.
Rise to our abundance. Honey, you are dropping them. That is really Yes, everybody listening, rise to your abundance, like really chew on that and just that for a moment. So I wanted to ask you, I'm sure, people can connect with you through your website and we'll give that. And the links to connect with you will also be in the show description as well. But for those that are local to New York, do you teach dance classes? Like, can people actually have the opportunity to dance with you, or is that not?
At this moment, I do not teach dance classes. I might in the future. I go off and on like teaching workshops and things. I do teach workshops, so I post about those on my website, and they're kind of sporadic, like every few months.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so what can people connect with you with specifically? We talked about the doula work, but do they have to be in New York, or do you do remote sessions with people? Are you able to discuss with people, like online or by phone or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm super happy to do remote work. People can connect with me for literally, as I was saying, full spectrum work. So anything from menstrual concerns, like learning how to track your cycle. I'm really excited right now about working with clients on endometriosis and PCOS, ovarian cysts, things that are like affecting their daily lives. And then, of course, birth, postpartum, menopause, puberty, literally everything. So you can connect with me about those from far away or here in NYC.
Beautiful. So how can we contact you? What is your website?
Yeah, so my website is rochellejamila.com, and that's ROCHELLEJAMILA.com.
And on social media, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is the same as my website. It's Rochelle_Jamila.
Rochelle_Jamila.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So rochellejamila.com. And I am, of course, going to put that in the show notes just to make it very easy for everyone. And I have to tell you, your work and your point of view and your message, all of it is very inspiring. And I'm so thankful that you came to share all of this with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for creating this platform for people to learn and share about important healing work.
Us Aquarians, it's all about community, right? Like,
Yes.
yes, honey, Aquarius, like, come on, it's a community, it is communal support, and, there's nothing like it. So it is really an honor for me to hold this space, and thank you so much. And for everyone listening, you can connect with Rochelle. Be sure to let her know if any of her words have inspired you, and we will see you all next time.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
You're welcome.